A cocky Navy SEAL recruit laughed at the scars on his female instructor's arms, jagged reminders of battles she never spoke of. He mocked her in front of the others, thinking she was just another admin officer with a clipboard. But when a 4-star admiral arrived on base and locked eyes with her, everything changed. He didn't bark an order. He didn't give a speech. He saluted first, and he said one word that froze the entire room: echo. That recruit had no idea he'd just disrespected a living legend, a ghost from operations too classified to name. If this story made your heart race, your stomach drop, or your pride swell, subscribe. This is only the beginning. The morning sun beat down over Coronado Naval Base, reflecting off the steel frames of the obstacle course like fire on glass. SEAL recruit Nate Brewer wiped the sweat from his forehead with a smirk. 23, cocky, and cut from the kind of mold that excelled in Hell Weeks and revealed in proving it, he was already making a name for himself, mostly in his own head. He jogged in place at the edge of the course, flanked by half a dozen fellow recruits, their uniforms damp with exertion, and sand caked into the creases of their boots. "Easy day," Brewer muttered, eyeing the monkey bars ahead. "Hell, my grandmother could do this course blindfolded." Someone chuckled. Another grunted in half agreement. That's when he noticed her, lean, composed, leaning against one of the support pylons like part of the architecture. A female instructor in standard fatigues, her face unreadable beneath the brim of her cap. She wasn't yelling like the others, wasn't pacing or pointing or writing notes. She was just watching. Brewer's eyes narrowed. There was something odd about her stillness. Deliberate, maybe, but his attention snagged instead on the scars. Jagged, like torn lightning, crawling down both forearms. Not fresh, healed, deep, not the kind you get from paper cuts or field training mishaps. "Well, damn," Brewer said under his breath, nudging the recruit beside him. "Looks like someone lost a fight with a blender. What's the Navy doing hiring scarred-up admin chicks as instructors now?" A few of the guys laughed, short and sharp. One of them glanced toward her, then quickly looked away. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Just turned her head and looked at Brewer, catching his gaze like a hook under the sternum. Her eyes weren't angry, weren't soft. They were flat, quiet, like glass over deep water. For a second, Brewer's grin faltered. He didn't know why. Then she looked away, unmoved, unbothered, and Brewer shook his head, the smirk returning out of reflex more than confidence. "She probably files paperwork like she runs PT," he muttered. But something about the way she'd looked at him stuck in his spine like a splinter, and she never said a word. The range was alive with thunder, controlled bursts from M4s, the sharp clack of bolts cycling, instructors barking corrections over the din. Recruits moved through drills with mechanical focus, the scent of cordite settling thick on their uniforms. Nate Brewer stood at firing lane 9, his stance perfect, his trigger squeeze clean. He liked the range. Here, his scores did the talking, and lately they talked loud. Reloading with practiced ease, he glanced up and saw her again. She stood near the far wall, half shadowed by the awning's overhang, arms crossed, those same scars visible under rolled sleeves. The woman from the course. She wasn't holding a clipboard or giving direction. She wasn't even in the line of instructors. She just watched, still, unmoving, like she was reading more from the way each recruit held their weapon than any paper ever could. "What's she doing here?" Brewer muttered, just loud enough for the two guys beside him. "Making sure we don't bruise our egos with all this lead?" No one laughed this time. Not really. One gave a tight-lipped smile, but didn't meet his eyes. Then came the voice, gravel over steel. "Lieutenant Cross," barked Senior Chief Harlan, gesturing her over to a diagnostics table. "Need your eyes on this grouping pattern." Brewer blinked. "Lieutenant?" She nodded once and stepped forward, her movements fluid, economical. She didn't strut, didn't correct, just studied the target printouts and murmured something too quiet to hear. Harlan nodded. No ego, no condescension, just respect. Deference, even. Brewer felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. "She's a lieutenant?" he muttered again, his voice lower now. What kind of officer watches from the shadows and doesn't say a damn thing? As if hearing him through the noise, Cross turned. Her gaze found him again, sharp and silent. Not confrontational, not even curious, just assessing. Brewer met her stare longer than he meant to. There was no smugness in her eyes, no desire to put him in his place, just a kind of knowledge, something worn and heavy that he couldn't identify but felt all the same. He looked away first. She turned back to the table without a word. And Brewer suddenly wished he hadn't said anything at all. The sun was starting to fall low behind the ridgeline, casting long broken shadows across the compound as the recruits dragged themselves back toward the barracks. Sweat streaked the dust on their uniforms, boots heavy with grit and fatigue. Brewer moved with the swagger of someone who felt untouched by exhaustion. He cracked his neck, stretched out a sore shoulder, and made another lazy jab at Lieutenant Cross's scars to one of the nearby recruits. "Maybe she just fell asleep on a shredder," he muttered. That time, the silence that followed wasn't passive. A boot step crunched behind him, slow, deliberate. "Say that again, Brewer," came a voice like gravel and salt. Chief Petty Officer Delgado. Everyone in the platoon knew Delgado. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. His voice had the weight of hard-earned violence behind it. Brewer straightened slightly but didn't back down. "Just a joke, Chief," he said, shrugging. "Didn't realize we were protecting her feelings now." Delgado stepped closer, eyes narrowed beneath a sun-bleached ball cap. "You don't know who you're talking about, kid, and I suggest you keep your mouth shut before it writes a check your trident'll never cash." There was no growl in the warning, just calm finality. Brewer gave a half chuckle, more out of habit than anything. "I'm top of my class, Chief. I think I can handle—" "You don't know a damn thing." Delgado's tone didn't rise. If anything, it cooled further. "You see a woman with scars. I see someone who's bled so others didn't have to. You'd do well to learn the difference." Then he walked away, leaving Brewer with the taste of something bitter in his mouth. He laughed it off for the others, but the edge of his grin felt cracked. That night in the barracks, with the lights dimmed and the fans humming overhead, Brewer sat on the edge of his bunk as the usual locker room talk faded into softer voices. One of the older recruits spoke, voice low and slow. "There's a story. Helmand Province. Early surge. One op, one survivor. A female operative. Ran point with nothing but a radio, a pistol, and a dead extraction team. Got everyone else out, never gave her name. Just a call sign." He let it sit for a moment. Echo. Brewer didn't speak. He just lay back, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above him, wondering how many times he'd already said the wrong thing to the wrong person. The sun hadn't even cleared the ocean when the recruits assembled at the log pit, breath steaming in the cold dawn air. Muscles still sore from the day before, backs aching from hours of gear drills, but none of them complained. Not out loud. Complaints were weakness, and weakness didn't survive long here. Brewer rolled his shoulders and eyed the line of telephone pole-sized logs laid out across the dirt. He felt good. the usual burn in his legs. A small, cocky fire still smoldering in his chest. Across the pit stood Lieutenant Cross, clipboard tucked under her arm, sleeves rolled high despite the chill. The scars caught the morning light, white against tanned skin, like pale veins drawn in rage. Brewer flashed a grin. "Let's get it, boys," he said, already walking toward the heaviest log like he'd been born to carry it. Cross didn't stop him. Didn't correct. She just watched, calm, observing. "Log carry, 2-man teams," she said. Her voice didn't rise to meet the wind. It didn't need to. "Quarter mile, around the course. Begin." Brewer hoisted the log with his partner and surged ahead. His boots dug into the dirt, legs pumping hard. He glanced back, just a little smug, and saw the rest falling behind, including Cross, still standing there, until she wasn't. No announcement, no command barked, just motion, fluid and certain. She lifted a log solo, no help, and joined the line, falling in beside the recruits without a sound. Brewer's grin faltered. She wasn't jogging, she was running and pulling ahead. A few recruits tried to keep up. One stumbled, dropping his end. Cross veered off course mid-stride, caught the log before it crushed the recruit's shoulder and pulled him to his feet. "You're done," she said simply. "You don't run on broken knees." Then she was gone again, falling back into pace, log across her shoulders like it weighed nothing. Brewer slowed without meaning to, chest heaving harder than it should have been. When they finally returned to the start, Cross was already there. Not winded, not sweating, just waiting. Brewer spat into the dirt, hands on his knees. "Who the hell is she?" he asked the recruit next to him. The guy just shook his head. "Nobody knows, but Chief Delgado calls her ma'am." Brewer said nothing after that, not even to himself. The kill house reeked of cordite, sweat, and the scorched bite of flashbang residue. Its plywood walls were pocked with years of training scars, scuffed corners, splintered edges, dark marks where barrels had slammed mid-entry. Brewer moved fast, just how he'd been taught. Breach, scan, fire, move. His angles were clean, his transitions sharp. No hesitation, no second-guessing. He cleared the final room in 2 seconds flat. Target down, imaginary threat neutralized. He exhaled, adrenaline tapering as his heartbeat pounded in his ears. Then she stepped from the shadows. Cross had been standing behind a support beam in the corner of the room, unseen, arms folded. Not hidden, just unnoticed. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence alone stole some of the air from the space. "You cut too hard on the second entry," she said, voice level. "Your shoulder opened to a potential shooter behind the doorway. 1 second, maybe 2, before you eat a round." Brewer straightened, annoyed before he could stop himself. "I made the shot, targets neutralized." Her head tilted slightly. "If it's paper, sure. If it's a human, you're bleeding out before your rifle cycles again." He bristled. "I know what I'm doing." She didn't argue, didn't even blink. Just nodded once and stepped past him, quiet as ever. "Then keep doing it until it stops working." And that was it. No lecture, no scolding, no ego, just the kind of observation you couldn't shake loose from your mind, no matter how hard you tried. That night, Brewer found himself on the beach. He hadn't planned to be there, but the barracks felt tight, too full of restless voices. The Pacific stretched out in black stillness, the waves just strong enough to drown out unwanted thoughts. Cross stood ahead of him, near the surf line, arms crossed, eyes locked on the horizon. The moonlight made her scars gleam. raised ridges that caught the silver sheen like coastline contours on a map. They weren't ugly, they were deliberate, earned, not accidents. Survival. Brewer watched from a distance, something in his chest tightening in a way that had nothing to do with pride or performance. For the first time, he wondered what kind of pain left marks like that, and what kind of person kept walking forward anyway. She never turned around, never acknowledged him, but he didn't move until she walked away. It started as a whisper around the compound. A 4-star admiral was flying in. No reason given, but everyone knew what that meant. Tight uniforms, clean boots, spit-shined brass. Recruits groaned, instructors barked louder than usual. Flags were double-checked. Clipboard inventory tripled overnight. Brewer didn't care. "Probably here to take pictures and shake hands," he muttered, as he adjusted his collar in formation. "They do it to remind themselves what real muscle looks like." Some of the recruits chuckled, but it felt thinner than usual. Brewer noticed the instructors weren't talking. Not like they usually did. No banter, just tension beneath their rigid stillness. When the admiral arrived, it was without ceremony. No parade, no trumpets, just the low whir of the Black Hawk blades slicing across the airfield, and a black Suburban rolling across the tarmac like a shark slipping through dark water. Out stepped Admiral Sutton. 4 stars, steel jaw, eyes like frostbite. Every step he took into the muster hall made the room feel smaller. The recruits snapped to attention. Instructors already were. Brewer stood tall, chin high, watching the admiral move briskly down the line with 2 aides flanking him and a security officer at his side. Sutton glanced at each recruit with the indifference of a man who'd seen too many faces to remember any of them. Until he saw her. Lieutenant Cross stood near the end of the row, hands behind her back, face still. The moment Sutton saw her, his steps faltered. Not visibly to most, but enough. He stopped. "Echo," he said, his voice low but clear. Not a question. A statement. Recognition dropped into the room like a detonator. The aides exchanged glances. Instructors stiffened further. Delgado didn't blink. He just watched. "I didn't know you were back," Sutton said softly. Then it happened. The admiral straightened and rendered a salute. To her. Not the kind you gave lightly, not protocol, not out of courtesy. This was the kind of salute that carried weight, respect, history. Brewer felt his mouth go dry. Cross returned the salute only after a pause. Her movement was crisp, exact. No one said a word. You didn't speak in moments like that. Even Brewer understood that now. Brewer stood frozen in his boots, a line of sweat crawling down his spine despite the cool air in the muster hall. Around him, no one moved. The silence wasn't just respectful, it was reverent, like something sacred had entered the room and everyone instinctively understood to stay quiet. The admiral hadn't looked away from Cross. He stood close now, speaking to her in low tones too quiet to carry, but the body language told everything. This wasn't a superior addressing a subordinate. This was a peer, maybe more. Brewer's brain scrambled to make sense of what he was seeing. Lieutenant Cross, the woman he'd been mocking for weeks, the quiet presence who barely spoke, who watched more than she talked, who moved like she belonged somewhere else. She wasn't just respected, she was known, and not by rank, by call sign, Echo. He'd heard the name whispered late at night in barracks across the country, always in fragments. Half-truths and rumors. The woman who ghosted a compound in Kandahar with a busted ankle and half a mag. The operator who guided a Delta unit out of a collapsing ambush with nothing but hand signals and broken ribs. Nobody knew her face. Only the call sign. Only Echo. And now she stood right there, real and quiet, exchanging words with a man who ran fleets. Delgado hadn't said a word. His arms were crossed, face unreadable. But Brewer noticed how even he stood straighter, chest slightly forward. Not military protocol. Instinct. It was respect given, not demanded. The same kind Cross had commanded without ever asking for it. Brewer's mouth was dry. He couldn't look away. He wanted to. Every cell in his body screamed too, but he had to watch, had to know, had to understand. The admiral said something, and Cross gave a slight nod in reply. Then, as if aware of the 100 eyes locked on her, she shifted, the conversation ending. She took a single step back, hands behind her back again, returning to stillness. Quiet, unreadable, just echo. Still standing among them. But now every man and woman in that hall understood the mistake they'd made, assuming silence meant insignificance, assuming scars meant damage, not survival. And Brewer couldn't breathe. The admiral and Cross disappeared behind a steel door, a pair of aides trailing behind like shadows. It shut with a hollow thunk, leaving the muster hall suspended in a silence that didn't lift, even after the official orders came down. Drills resumed, formations reassembled, voices barked and boots thudded against concrete. But something was off. The rhythm had changed. Recruits moved quieter, spoke less. Eyes lingered longer when they passed Lieutenant Cross. No more jokes. No more smirks. Not even whispered side comments. Whatever had existed before, the arrogance, the ignorance, it had evaporated the second the admiral saluted her. Brewer didn't speak for most of the afternoon. He went through the motions of the day with mechanical focus, but his mind played reruns he couldn't turn off. The salute, the way Sutton had said her call sign like a memory, the word echo echoing in his own skull. During a break between drills, Brewer found himself near Chief Delgado. The old SEAL stood in the shade of the comms shack, arms folded, watching recruits reset the obstacle course with the patience of a man who'd watched empires rise and fall. Brewer hesitated. Then, "Chief? Was she part of Silver Dagger?" Delgado didn't move at first, just kept watching the course like the question hadn't been asked. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, even. "You weren't supposed to know her name. You weren't supposed to hear her call sign. You sure as hell weren't supposed to connect it to ops you don't have the clearance to spell out. Brewer stopped himself. The excuses felt hollow before they even left his mouth. Delgado turned then, eyes like iron under his cap. "You want to know what Echo did?" he asked, voice clipped. "You want to know how many people she pulled out of a kill zone with a torn artery and no backup? You want to know how many men are breathing right now because she didn't wait for orders?" Brewer said nothing. "You don't need to know. And that's how you survive long enough to deserve knowing." Delgado turned away, leaving Brewer standing in the silence that followed, the weight of it settling deep into his bones. Brewer had spent weeks looking down on the quiet woman in the corner. Now, he didn't even feel worthy to stand in her shadow. The armory was quiet in the late evening light, fluorescent tubes casting sterile blue over rows of meticulously cleaned weapons. The usual buzz of bodies and banter was gone, just the soft clink of metal, the distant hum of a vent. Brewer hesitated at the threshold, fingers twitching at his sides. His boots felt heavier than they should have. She was alone near the back wall, checking over a rack of M4s with methodical care. Her sleeves were rolled again, the pale, jagged trails on her arms catching the light like old roads on a faded map. She didn't look up when he entered. She didn't need to. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am." Her hand paused on a magazine, Still no glance. "I mean, Lieutenant, or—" he faltered, words crumbling under their own weight. She looked at him then, not sharp, not cold, just present, listening. "I owe you an apology," he said, voice rougher than he wanted. "For the things I said, the way I acted, I didn't know." "No," she said quietly, "you didn't." There was no malice in it, no vindication, just truth. He wished she'd yelled. That would have been easier. "I judged what I didn't understand," he continued. "I was loud when I should have shut up. I thought being the best meant acting like it. I didn't see." She watched him for a moment longer, then looked down, adjusted the bolt on the rifle in her hands. "Scars tell stories, recruit," she said finally. Her voice was soft, almost tired. "But not all of them are mine to explain." Brewer swallowed. "Were they from Silver Dagger?" She didn't answer, just inserted the rifle back into the rack, clicked it into place. "You don't earn your trident by being loud," she said, turning back to him. "You earn it by being ready to bleed quietly, for someone else, for something bigger." He nodded, though he wasn't sure if it was understanding or just the absence of anything else to offer. Then she walked past him, footsteps silent against the tile. No sermon. No forgiveness. Just a truth she had carried long before he'd ever stepped on this base. And Brewer stood there, hollow and still, the weight of her words echoing louder than any rebuke could have. The weeks rolled forward, dragging sweat and sand and exhaustion with them. Coronado kept its rhythm. Early mornings, blistered hands, instructors barking until voices went hoarse. But something had shifted beneath the surface. It wasn't dramatic. It was quieter than that. Subtle, intentional. Recruits whispered less now. They watched more. Especially when Cross stepped onto the field. She never announced herself. Never raised her voice. She didn't need to. The brutal precision in her drills spoke louder than any command. Her presence alone carved silence into the air. She trained like she moved through combat. Sharp, direct, surgical. She didn't perform. She didn't explain. She just did. And anyone with half a brain paid attention. Brewer did more than that. He stopped trying to be impressive. Stopped trying to lead the room with volume. He ran harder, carried longer, studied everything. Her pace, her phrasing, the slight movements she made correcting a rifle stance or a breaching grip. She never acknowledged him directly, but once, only once, she watched him clear a corner and gave the smallest nod. That was enough. One afternoon, during gear check, a new recruit, fresh off the bus and full of too much pride, saw Cross pass by and made a low comment about her scars, loud enough to impress his buddies, loud enough to be heard. Brewer stood, jaw tight. Then he walked over and stopped in front of the kid. "You think you know who she is?" he asked, voice calm. No heat, no warning. The recruit blinked, surprised. "What? She's—" Brewer pointed with his chin toward the cross, now adjusting the sling on a recruit's M4 with a quiet patience that would have looked like kindness if you didn't know better. "That's Echo," Brewer said. "She doesn't wear stars. She doesn't tell war stories. But generals salute her first. And if you're lucky, you'll spend your whole career trying to be half the soldier she doesn't even pretend to be." The recruit said nothing after that. Brewer turned back to his drill, eyes forward, mouth shut. Still learning, always learning.